The train whistle cut through the Kansas morning like a knife through butter, its mournful cry echoing across the empty plains. Joanna Bellamy stood on the platform, her black morning dress already collecting dust from the prairie wind. She clutched a worn leather valise in one hand and a small wooden trunk sat at her feet, everything she owned in this world, everything worth taking. 3 days had passed since they'd lowered Samuel into the ground. 3 days since the preacher spoke words about eternal rest over a man who'd found his rest at the bottom of too many bottles. The townsfolk had been kind enough, offering their condolences with downcast eyes and hushed voices. But Joanna saw the relief in their faces. Samuel Bellamy's drunken rages were nobody's secret in Lawrence. "You heading somewhere, Mrs. Bellamy?" The station master, old Henry Pritchard, peered at her through wire spectacles. "West," she said simply, purchasing a ticket to the end of the line. She didn't know where that was exactly, and it didn't matter. Away was destination enough. The compartment smelled of coal smoke and unwashed bodies. Joanna found a seat by the window, placing her valise carefully on the floor. Inside, wrapped in her late mother's shawl, lay an empty whiskey bottle, the last one Samuel had drained before his heart gave out. She'd almost thrown it away a dozen times, but something made her keep it. Not for sentiment. Lord knew there was precious little of that left. She kept it as a reminder of what she was leaving behind, of what she never wanted to become. The prairie rolled past her window in endless waves of brown grass. She'd lived her whole life in Kansas, married at 17 to a man who'd seemed charming when sober, which grew rarer with each passing year. 10 years of marriage had aged her 20. The mirror showed a woman of 27, but her eyes belonged to someone much older. "Ticket, ma'am." The conductor's voice startled her from her reverie. She handed over the slip of paper. "Dust Hollow. End of the line indeed." He punched it and moved on, leaving Joanna to wonder what kind of place bore such a name. She'd chosen it precisely because she knew nothing about it. No family connections, no acquaintances who might write back to Lawrence with gossip. In Dust Hollow, she could be anyone or no one at all. The landscape changed as they traveled west. The gentle rolls of Kansas gave way to rougher country, dotted with scrub brush and crossed by dry creek beds. The towns grew smaller and farther between, wooden structures replacing the brick buildings she'd known. This was frontier country, where civilization held on by its fingernails. Night fell, and Joanna dozed fitfully against the window. In her dreams, Samuel stood in their kitchen, his face red with drink and rage. But when he opened his mouth to shout, only train whistles came out. She woke with a start, her hands trembling. A woman across the aisle looked at her with sympathy. "Bad dreams, honey." Joanna straightened her spine. "Just tired from the journey." "Ain't we all?" The woman shifted her sleeping child to her other arm. "You got people in Dust Hollow?" "No." The woman's eyebrows rose, but she said nothing more. Women traveling alone to frontier towns without family waiting well. There were only so many reasons for that, and none of them were anybody's business but their own. The sun was high when the train finally wheezed to a stop. The conductor called out, "Dust Hollow, end of the line." Joanna gathered her belongings and stepped onto the platform. The heat hit her like a physical blow after the relative cool of the train. Dust Hollow spread before her, a single main street lined with weather-beaten buildings, horses tied to hitching posts, and men who looked like they'd been carved from the same weathered wood as the storefronts. The depot was little more than a shack with a sign. No porter appeared to help with her trunk, so Joanna dragged it herself to the edge of the platform. The few other passengers dispersed quickly, leaving her alone with the ticket agent who eyed her with curiosity. "You'll be wanting the boarding house," he said without preamble. "Mrs. Hutchinson's place, 2 blocks down on the right. Only respectable lodging for ladies in town." "Thank you." Joanna lifted her trunk, surprised by how heavy it seemed now. Everything felt heavier here, the air, the sun, the weight of starting over. The main street was packed dirt, raised wooden sidewalks running along the buildings to keep folks out of the mud when it rained. Not that it looked like rain was a frequent visitor to Dust Hollow. Everything wore a coat of fine dust, from the windows to the horses to the men lounging outside the saloons. She counted 3 saloons on her way to the boarding house, their doors open to catch any stray breeze. Piano music drifted from one, raucous laughter from another. Men paused in their conversations to watch her pass. A woman in mourning clothes was either a widow or trouble, and in a place like Dust Hollow, both commanded attention. Mrs. Hutchinson's boarding house was a 2-story frame building that had once been painted white. The proprietress herself answered Joanna's knock, a stout woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that took in everything from Joanna's dusty hem to the trunk at her feet. "I need a room," Joanna said. "I can pay a week in advance." "That's good, because I don't extend credit." Mrs. Hutchinson stepped aside. "You got a husband coming later." "I'm a widow." The word still felt strange in her mouth. Widow suggested grief, loss, a desire to have back what was gone. Joanna felt none of those things. Only relief, and the guilt that came with it. Mrs. Hutchinson's expression softened slightly. "Room's $1 a week. Includes breakfast, but not supper. No gentlemen callers after 8 o'clock. No spirits in the rooms. And I run a respectable house." "That suits me fine." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and single window overlooking the back alley. Joanna unpacked slowly, hanging her 3 dresses on pegs, placing her few belongings in the dresser drawer. The empty whiskey bottle she wrapped again in the shawl and placed at the bottom of the drawer. A reminder, a talisman, a warning. That evening, she ventured out to find supper and work. The hotel dining room was too expensive for everyday meals, so she found a small eatery run by a Mexican family. The food was simple but good, and no one asked questions. Finding work proved harder. The mercantile didn't need help. The hotel had all the maids it required. The seamstress already had an assistant. As darkness approached, Joanna faced the truth she'd been avoiding. In a town like Dust Hollow, there was really only one kind of work readily available for a woman alone. The red lantern sat at the far end of the street, its windows glowing warmly in the dusk. Joanna stood outside for a long moment, steeling herself. She'd sworn she'd never set foot in such a place, but principles were a luxury she couldn't afford. She needed work, and she needed it now. The saloon was everything she'd expected, smoke-filled, loud, reeking of whiskey and male sweat. A small stage dominated one end where a woman in a low-cut dress sang off-key. Men crowded the bar and gaming tables, their voices rising and falling with their luck. Joanna made her way to the bar, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The bartender, a thin man with pomaded hair, looked her up and down. "We don't serve unescorted ladies," he said, though his tone suggested he'd be willing to make exceptions. "I'm not here to drink. I'm looking for work." "That's so." He leaned forward. "You got experience." Before Joanna could answer, a hand grabbed her arm. She turned to find a drunk cowboy grinning at her, his breath foul with whiskey. "Well, what have we here, a pretty little dove come to roost?" Joanna tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Fear shot through her, the old familiar fear from nights when Samuel came home drunk and mean. Then suddenly the cowboy's hand was gone, twisted behind his back by someone else. Joanna looked up to see a tall man with dark hair and a darker expression. Without a word, he steered the drunk toward the door and pushed him out. The saloon had gone quiet, everyone watching. The tall man turned to the bartender. "She needs a better place to start over than this. Tom." Tom shrugged. "Work's work, McCade." The man McCade studied Joanna with eyes the color of winter sky. "You know what kind of work they're expecting here?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "I need employment. I can serve drinks. Clean." "Not here you can't. Not without becoming something else." He turned and walked away, leaving Joanna standing there with every eye in the place on her. She fled, pushing through the swinging doors into the night. Shame burned in her throat. She'd been so naive, thinking she could walk into a saloon and simply ask for honest work. But what choice did she have? Back in her room, Joanna sat on the narrow bed and unwrapped the whiskey bottle. She stared at it in the lamplight, remembering Samuel's last night. He'd finished this bottle and reached for another, but his heart had other plans. She'd found him on the kitchen floor the next morning, his face peaceful for the first time in years. "Sleep comes easier with whiskey," he used to say, pouring another glass with shaking hands. But Joanna had never touched the stuff. She'd seen what it did, how it changed people, made them cruel and weak by turns. She wrapped the bottle again and put it away. Tomorrow she'd try again. There had to be something in this dust-blown town for a woman who wanted to work honestly. And if not, well, she'd survived 10 years with Samuel Bellamy. She could survive anything. Outside her window, Dust Hollow settled into sleep. Somewhere a dog barked, a drunk sang his way home, and Joanna Bellamy, widow and stranger, began her first night in a place where nobody knew her name or her sorrows. It was exactly what she'd wanted. So why did she feel more alone than ever? The morning sun crept through Joanna's window, painting stripes across the wooden floor. She'd barely slept, her mind churning over the previous evening's humiliation. Mrs. Hutchinson's breakfast of biscuits and gravy sat heavy in her stomach as she contemplated her options. By afternoon, desperation won over pride. She stood again outside the Red Lantern, this time in daylight when the establishment looked less threatening, just another weathered building on a dusty street. Through the window, she could see a man sweeping the floor, preparing for the evening trade. She pushed through the doors before courage failed her. The man with the broom looked up. It was Tom, the bartender from last night, looking less polished in the harsh afternoon light. "You're back," he observed without surprise. "I need work, Mr. Just Tom." He leaned on his broom. "McCade was right. You know, this ain't the place for a lady like you. I'm not asking for opinions. I'm asking for employment." Tom studied her, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the careful mending on her dress, the pride fighting with necessity in her eyes. "Can you carry a tray without dropping it? Add figures in your head? Handle yourself when men get familiar?" Yes to the first two. As for the third, she thought of Samuel's rough hands, his whiskey-fueled rages. "I can handle myself." "All right then, $1 a night plus tips. You serve drinks and nothing else. Any man gives you trouble. You tell Big Jim over there." He nodded toward a mountain of a man cleaning glasses behind the bar. "You start at 6. Wear something that shows you're a woman, but not too much woman, if you catch my meaning." Joanna nodded, relief flooding through her. It wasn't ideal, but it was honest work. Mostly. She spent the afternoon altering one of her dresses, lowering the neckline just enough to be fashionable rather than modest, taking in the waist to show her figure without being improper. The woman in the mirror looked different harder, maybe, or just more practical. At 6 sharp, she reported for duty. The saloon was already half full. Cowboys and merchants and drifters belly up to the bar or hunched over card tables. Tom handed her a tray. "Start with the back tables. They tip better early in the evening before they lose too much at cards." The work was harder than she'd expected. The trays were heavy, the air thick with smoke that made her eyes water, and the men's comments ranged from mildly forward to downright crude. But Joanna had survived worse. She served drinks with a neutral smile, sidestepped wandering hands with practiced ease, and slowly found a rhythm. "Hey there, pretty lady. Why don't you sit a spell?" A cowboy with tobacco-stained teeth patted his lap. "Can't, sir. I've got thirsty customers waiting." She moved past him smoothly, already learning the dance of avoidance. The evening wore on. Her feet ached in her worn boots, and sweat trickled down her back despite the cool night air coming through the open doors. She was serving a table of railroad workers when trouble walked in. The same drunk from the previous night stumbled through the doors, his eyes mean and looking for satisfaction. They found Joanna immediately. Well, well, if it ain't the high and mighty widow woman. He weaved toward her, ignoring Big Jim's warning look. Too good for us last night, but here you are serving drinks like a common abbé. That's enough. Wade. The voice came from behind her, quiet, but carrying the weight of authority. Joanna turned to see McCade standing in the doorway. He looked different than last night, dustier, like he'd ridden hard to get here. His coat was pushed back, revealing the Colt at his hip, though his hand stayed relaxed at his side. Wade's face flushed darker. This ain't your concern. McCade, the lady and I got unfinished business. No, you don't. McCade stepped forward, positioning himself between Wade and Joanna. You're drunk, Wade. Go home. Or what you'll shoot me like you shot your own. The saloon went dead silent. McCade's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. Go home, Wade. Something in McCade's eyes must have penetrated Wade's whiskey haze. The drunk muttered a curse and stumbled out, leaving tension thick as smoke in his wake. McCade turned to Joanna. You all right? She nodded, acutely aware that every eye in the place was on them. Thank you, Mr. McCade. He looked like he wanted to say more, then simply touched his hat brim and walked to the bar. Tom poured him a whiskey without being asked. What was that about? Joanna asked Tom quietly when she returned with empty glasses. Tom glanced at McCade, who sat alone despite the crowded bar. Thorne McCade used to be the best tracker in 3 territories. Could find a needle in a haystack, bring back horses everyone else gave up for lost. Then about 2 years ago, he lowered his voice. His younger brother Jake got mixed up with some rustlers. Thorne tried to bring him in peaceful-like, but Jake drew on him. Didn't leave Thorne much choice. Joanna looked at the man hunched over his whiskey. She understood now the weight in his shoulders, the careful way others gave him space. He'd done what he had to do and was living with it. She knew something about that. The rest of the evening passed without incident, though Joanna was aware of McCade's presence like a shield between her and trouble. He nursed the same whiskey for an hour, then left as quietly as he'd come. When the saloon finally closed at 2 a.m, Joanna's feet were screaming and her head pounded from the noise and smoke, but she had $3 in tips jingling in her pocket, more than she'd hoped for. You did all right, Tom admitted, counting out her dollar wage. Most girls don't last the first night. That run-in with Wade would have sent them packing. I've dealt with worse than Wade. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Tom's eyes sharpened with curiosity, but he didn't pry. McCade doesn't usually come to town midweek. Lives out at the old postal station near Sanctuary Ridge. Keeps to himself mostly. Why did he come tonight? Tom shrugged. Maybe he had business. Maybe he wanted a drink. Or maybe, he gave her a knowing look, maybe he wanted to make sure you were all right. Joanna flushed. He doesn't know me. McCade's got a habit of looking out for strays. Dogs, horses, people who need help. Lost causes, mostly. Tom started wiping down the bar. Just don't get any romantic notions. Man's got ghosts enough for 10 men. Walking back to the boarding house through empty streets, Joanna thought about ghosts. Everyone in Dust Hollow seemed to have them, Tom, with his careful questions unasked. Big Jim, who spoke in grunts and had scars on his knuckles. The painted women upstairs who'd watched her with knowing sympathy. Maybe that's what made it the perfect place for her. A town full of people running from something, where nobody asked about your past because they didn't want questions about their own. In her room, she counted her earnings again. $4 for one night's work. If she could keep this up, she'd have enough saved to what she didn't know yet. For now, surviving was enough. She unwrapped the whiskey bottle again, holding it up to the lamplight. Samuel used to say the amber liquid looked like liquid gold, like sunshine trapped in glass. To Joanna, it looked like everything she'd left behind: the fear, the bruises hidden under long sleeves, the nights pretending to be asleep when he came stumbling home. A soft knock at her door made her heart jump. Who is it? Mrs. Hutchinson, dear, saw your light. Joanna wrapped the bottle quickly and opened the door. The landlady stood in her nightgown and shawl. Her face creased with concern. Heard you took work at the Red Lantern. I did. Mrs. Hutchinson sighed. It's none of my business, but be careful, child. That's a hard place for a woman alone. I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can. Just remember, this town's got a way of changing people. Don't let it change you into something you're not. After she left, Joanna sat on her bed thinking about change. She'd already changed, hadn't she? The girl who'd married Samuel Bellamy at 17, full of hope and dreams, was long gone. The woman who'd stood over his body and felt only relief she was someone else entirely. And now she was a saloon girl in a dusty frontier town, serving whiskey to men who looked at her with hungry eyes. But she was also free. No one here knew about the bruises, the fear, the nights she'd hidden in the root cellar when Samuel's rage grew too large for their small house. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising rain that might or might not come. Dust Hollow could use the rain, she thought. Wash some of the grit away, make everything clean for a day or two before the dust reclaimed it all. She thought of McCade, the way he'd stepped between her and trouble without hesitation. Tom was right, she shouldn't get romantic notions. A man who'd killed his own brother, justified or not, carried weight no woman should have to share. But she couldn't forget the look in his eyes when Wade had almost said the words, that recognition of pain, of living with something that couldn't be undone. They were alike in that way. She and Thorne McCade, both carrying ghosts. Sleep comes easier with whiskey, Samuel had always said, but Joanna was learning that wasn't true. Sleep came easier when you were exhausted from honest work, when you had a locked door between you and the world, when you were in a place where nobody knew your ghosts by name. Tomorrow she'd serve more drinks, dodge more hands, earn more dollars. Tomorrow she'd build this new life one day at a time. And maybe, if she was careful and smart and lucky, she could leave the ghosts behind for good. The thunder came closer, and finally, the rain began to fall. The week settled into a rhythm. Joanna served drinks at the Red Lantern 6 nights a week, dodging hands and harsh words with increasing skill. She'd learned which customers to avoid, which ones tipped well, and which ones just wanted someone to listen to their troubles. The work was hard, but it was hers. She'd seen McCade only twice more, both times he'd sat quietly at the bar, nursed a single whiskey, and left without speaking to anyone. But his presence had been enough to keep the rougher elements in check. Word had spread that the widow woman was under Thorne McCade's protection, though nobody could say why. You're curious about him, Tom observed one slow Tuesday night. Joanna concentrated on wiping down tables. I'm grateful. Nothing more. Uh-huh. Tom's knowing smile irritated her. Well, if you're so grateful, maybe you should know McCade's got a standing order at Murphy's store. Supplies delivered once a month to the old postal station. But Murphy's boy is laid up with a broken leg, and there's nobody else to make the delivery tomorrow. Why are you telling me this? Just thinking aloud. Course, if someone were to volunteer to make that delivery, Murphy would probably pay them $1 for the trouble. Joanna kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. $1 was $1, and she was curious, despite herself. The next morning found her at Murphy's general store, offering her services. Old man Murphy looked skeptical. It's a 5-mile ride out to Sanctuary Ridge. You know how to handle a wagon? I can manage. She'd driven her father's wagon as a girl, before marriage had caged her in town. Murphy scratched his beard. McCade's particular about his privacy. Don't take kindly to folks nosing around. I'm just delivering supplies. Mr. Murphy, nothing more. He loaded the wagon with her help flour, coffee, salt pork, ammunition, and, oddly enough, several tins of peaches. McCade's got a sweet tooth, Murphy explained. Only human thing about him, some say. The road to Sanctuary Ridge was rough, little more than wagon ruts through sagebrush and rock. The October sun beat down mercilessly, and Joanna was grateful for the old bonnet missus Hutchinson had lent her. The landscape opened up as she left town, vast and empty under an endless sky. She had been told to look for a lightning-struck pine, then turn north toward the ridge. The postal station would be nestled against the rocks, built there 40 years ago when there'd been hope of a regular route through this territory. That hope had died with the Indian Wars, leaving the station abandoned until McCade claimed it. The struck pine appeared like a signpost, its blackened trunk stark against the pale soil. Joanna turned north, the wagon bumping over increasingly rough terrain. She was beginning to worry she'd taken a wrong turn when she saw it a low building of weathered wood and stone, backed against a red rock ridge. Smoke rose from the chimney, the only sign of life. No horses in the corral, no dogs barking warning. The silence was complete except for the creak of wagon wheels. Joanna pulled up in front of the building, uncertain whether to call out or simply unload the supplies. The question was answered when the door opened and McCade stepped out, rifle held casually but ready. His expression shifted from wariness to surprise. "Mrs. Bellamy." "Mr. McCade, Murphy's boy is injured, and I volunteered to make the delivery." She gestured to the loaded wagon. "Where would you like these?" He set the rifle aside and approached slowly, like a man not used to visitors. In daylight, she could see him better, the lines carved by sun and sorrow around his eyes, the careful way he moved, always aware of his surroundings. "I'll unload them. You shouldn't have come all this way." "It's $1 earned, Mr. McCade. I'm not too proud for honest work." Something shifted in his expression. "No, I don't suppose you are. There's water in the well if you're thirsty. I'll handle this." But Joanna was already climbing down, reaching for a sack of flour. "Two can work faster than one." They unloaded in silence, carrying supplies into the station. The interior surprised her, neat as a pin. Everything in its place. Books lined one wall, more than she'd expected. A table and chairs obviously handmade, but skillfully done. No bottles visible, despite what she'd heard about McCade drinking alone out here. "You keep a nice home," she said, setting down the last tin of peaches. "It's quiet." He stood awkwardly, like he'd forgotten how to be host. Would you like some coffee before you head back?" She should say no, should climb back on that wagon and return to town before people started talking. But the ride had been long and dusty, and McCade looked so uncertain, like he was out of practice with simple kindness. Coffee would be welcome. He moved efficiently around the small kitchen area, stoking the stove, grinding beans. Joanna sat at the table, noting the careful craftsmanship, the smooth polish of wood worn by use. "You made this. Helps pass the time." He set a cup before her, black coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. "Sorry, I'm out of sugar." "This is fine." The coffee was good, better than what they served at the boarding house. "It's peaceful here." "That's why I stay." He sat across from her, cradling his own cup. "Town's got too many eyes, too many voices." She understood that, even after weeks in Dust Hollow. She felt the weight of watching eyes, the whispered speculations about the widow who worked at the Red Lantern. "They talk about you," she said, then immediately regretted it. His smile was bitter. "I know what they say, that I killed my brother, that I'm hiding out here like a coward, that I've got blood on my hands that won't wash clean. Is it true about your brother?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, Jake was 8 years younger than me. I practically raised him after our parents died. Taught him to ride, to shoot, to track. Thought I taught him right from wrong, too." He stared into his coffee like it held answers. "He fell in with bad men, started small running errands, holding horses. By the time I realized how deep he was in, it was too late. They were rustling cattle. Had killed a man over in Cedar Falls. The marshal put a bounty on the whole gang." "You tried to bring him in." "I tried to save him." The words were rough. Tracked them to a box canyon. Told Jake to come with me, that I'd speak for him, get him a lighter sentence, but he... McCade's jaw worked. He drew on me, my own brother, and I was faster. The silence stretched between them, heavy with understanding. Joanna thought of Samuel, of the relief she'd felt finding him dead. Different circumstances, but the same weight, the guilt of surviving, of not grieving the way you're supposed to. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "So am I, every day." He looked up at her. "What about you? What brings a woman alone to a place like Dust Hollow?" "My husband died. The truth, if not all of it. There was nothing left for me in Kansas. No family. None that would claim me after I married Samuel." She hadn't meant to say his name, but it slipped out. "He wasn't what they'd hoped for me." McCade studied her with those winter sky eyes. "He hurt you?" It wasn't a question. Somehow he saw past her careful facade to the truth beneath. Joanna's hand went unconsciously to her ribs, where the last break had barely healed before Samuel died. "Not anymore," she said quietly. "No, not anymore." He raised his cup slightly, like a toast to their shared ghosts. "You're safe here, Mrs. Bellamy, in town. I mean, I know the Red Lantern's rough, but Tom's decent enough, and Big Jim won't let anyone cross the line. And you coming to town those nights? Was that about keeping me safe?" He looked uncomfortable. "Maybe, or maybe I just wanted a drink and some noise. Gets too quiet out here sometimes." But she'd seen him in the saloon, how he barely touched his whiskey, how he watched without seeming to. He was protecting her, for reasons she didn't understand. "I should go," she said, standing. "It's a long ride back." He walked her to the wagon, helped her up with careful hands that avoided any improper touch. "Mrs. Bellamy, Joanna." Her name sounded different in his rough voice. "If you ever need anything, if anyone gives you trouble, you send word. Murphy knows how to reach me." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why do you care what happens to me?" He looked away, toward the ridge that gave his refuge its name. "Maybe because I know what it's like to carry weight that wasn't your fault. Maybe because you're trying to start clean, and everyone deserves that chance." He met her eyes. "Or maybe because you didn't look at me with fear that first night, even after what Wade almost said." The ride back to town seemed shorter, her mind full of coffee and confessions. McCade Thorne was not what she'd expected. The town painted him as a dangerous recluse, a man to be avoided. But she'd seen his books, drunk his excellent coffee, heard the pain in his voice when he spoke of his brother. They were alike, she realized. Both hiding from the world, both carrying guilt for things that weren't truly their fault. The difference was he'd chosen isolation while she'd chosen invisibility in a crowd. When she returned the wagon to Murphy, he counted out her dollar with a speculative look. "McCade treats you decent." "He was a perfect gentleman." "Huh." Murphy clearly had expected a different answer. "Well, if you're willing, I might have more deliveries need making. My boy won't be walking right for weeks yet." "I'm willing." That night at the Red Lantern, Tom noticed her distraction. "You all right? You seem miles away." "Just tired." But she was thinking of books on a wall, strong coffee, and gray eyes that saw too much. "McCade get his supplies all right?" The question was too casual. Joanna nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good, good." Tom moved away, but she caught his satisfied smile. The evening passed in a blur. Joanna served drinks, smiled at jokes she didn't find funny, and thought about silence. The saloon was always so loud, laughter, arguments, the tinny piano, glasses clinking. She'd thought she wanted that after years of tiptoeing around Samuel's moods. But now she remembered the quiet of the postal station, broken only by wind in the rocks and the clink of coffee cups. Near closing time, a familiar figure pushed through the doors. Her heart jumped before she could stop it, But it wasn't Thorn. Instead, Wade stumbled in, drunker than before, if that was possible.
"There she is,"
he slurred, pointing at Joanna.
"McCade's woman. Think you're too good for the rest of us?"
Big Jim started forward, but Wade pulled a knife. "Stay back, I got words for the widow." The saloon went silent, everyone frozen. Joanna stood very still, tray in her hands, calculating distances. The knife weaved in Wade's unsteady grip. "You know what he did," Wade's voice rose. "Shot his own brother, his own blood, and you're making eyes at him, visiting him at his hideout." So word had already spread about her delivery run. Joanna kept her voice calm. "Put the knife down. Wade, you're drunk." "Drunk enough to tell the truth." He took a step closer. "Jake McCade was my friend. We were going to make something of ourselves until his high and mighty brother decided to play judge and jury." "That's enough." The voice came from the doorway. Thorn stood there. Not dramatically, just present. He didn't look at Wade, didn't acknowledge the knife. His eyes were on Joanna. "You all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." Now he looked at Wade. "Put it down. Wade, you're scaring the lady."
"Like you scared Jake."
Wade's face was red, tears mixing with sweat.
"He trusted you."
"Yes," Thorn said quietly. "He did, and I failed him. But that's between me and Jake's ghost. Not you, not her. Put down the knife." Something in Thorn's voice, not threat, just infinite weariness, seemed to reach Wade. The knife clattered to the floor. Big Jim moved fast for such a large man, grabbing Wade and hauling him toward the door. "You're banned," Tom called after them. "Don't come back." The saloon slowly returned to life. Conversations resuming, cards shuffling. Thorn remained by the door, clearly wanting to leave but waiting. Joanna approached him. "Thank you, again. I'm sorry about that. Wade's been nursing that grudge for 2 years. I didn't think." He stopped. "Are you finished for the night?" "Almost. I'll wait, walk you back to the boarding house. People will talk." "People already are." His smile was grim. "Might as well make it worth their gossip." The November wind had teeth. It came howling down from the mountains, bringing the promise of winter and setting everyone's nerves on edge. Joanna pulled her thin shawl tighter as she walked home from the Red Lantern, her latest shift ending just as the weather turned mean. 3 weeks had passed since the incident with Wade. Thorn had walked her home that night, their footsteps the only sound on the empty street. He'd said little, just touched his hat at Mrs. Hutchinson's door and disappeared into the darkness. She hadn't seen him since, though Tom mentioned he'd been by to collect a special order from Murphy's winter supplies, preparing for the season ahead. Now the wind drove needles of ice into her face, and Joanna quickened her pace. The boarding house was still 6 blocks away, and the temperature was dropping fast. She'd left her heavier coat in her room, not expecting the weather to turn so suddenly. By the time she reached the corner where the church stood, or what passed for a church, really just a converted stable with a cross nailed to the door, her fingers were numb and her teeth chattering. The wind picked up, driving what felt like tiny shards of glass into her exposed skin. Snow, the first snow of winter, coming hard and fast and unexpected. Joanna tried to push forward, but the wind drove her back. She could barely see through the sudden white curtain that descended like a wall between her and safety. The boarding house might as well have been miles away. Panic fluttered in her chest. She'd heard stories of people freezing to death just yards from shelter, lost in the white blindness of a plains blizzard. Already she could feel the cold seeping through her thin dress, numbing her limbs. A shape loomed out of the white, a horse and rider, moving with purpose through the storm. The rider spotted her, turned his mount. "Joanna!" Thorn's voice cut through the wind's howl. He swung down from his horse, immediately pulling off his heavy coat. "What are you doing out in this?" "Walking home." Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak. "It came up so fast." He wrapped his coat around her. the warmth of it almost painful against her frozen skin. "You'll never make it to the boarding house. Can you ride?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure she could feel her feet anymore. Thorn lifted her onto his horse as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, sheltering her from the worst of the wind. "The station's closer," he said in her ear. "We'll wait out the storm there." She wanted to protest the impropriety, what people would say, but survival trumped reputation. She nodded, leaning back against his warmth as he turned the horse toward Sanctuary Ridge. The ride seemed endless, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Thorn knew the way blind, guiding his horse through the white chaos with the instinct of a man who'd spent years reading the land. Joanna concentrated on staying conscious, on the solid warmth of the man behind her, on anything but the cold that wanted to drag her down into sleep. Finally, blessed finally, the dark bulk of the station appeared. Thorn dismounted, reached up for her. Her legs buckled when they hit the ground, and he caught her, half carrying her to the door. Inside was dark and cold, though at least the wind couldn't reach them. Thorn deposited her in a chair and moved quickly to the stove, feeding it kindling with practiced efficiency. Light bloomed as he lit a lamp, then another, revealing the familiar, neat space. "We need to get you warm," he said, already pulling blankets from a chest. "Your hands let me see." Her fingers were white, edged with blue. Thorn cursed under his breath, gently taking her hands between his. His touch was careful, warming her fingers gradually. "Hurts," she gasped as feeling returned in pins and needles. "That's good. Pain means no frostbite." He continued rubbing her hands, his face intent. "What were you thinking, walking in weather like this?" "It wasn't snowing when I left work, just cold." Her shivering was violent now, her body trying to warm itself. "Came up so fast. Plains blizzards do that. Kill the unprepared." He released her hands, satisfied with their color. "Your feet now, boots off." Propriety be damned. Joanna fumbled with her boots, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. Thorn knelt, unlacing them with the same gentle efficiency. Her stockings were soaked through, her feet nearly as white as her hands had been. He didn't comment on the mended places in her stockings or the worn state of her boots. Just wrapped her feet in a warm blanket and stood. "I'll make coffee. And soup, you need something hot inside you." She watched him move around the kitchen area, still shivering despite the blankets. The stove was warming the room gradually, but the cold had settled deep in her bones. "I have some clothing that might fit," he said, not looking at her. "Dry things. They're clean." Jake's clothes. She realized he'd kept his brother's things. "Thank you." He disappeared into what must be a bedroom, returning with a shirt, trousers, and thick wool socks. "They'll be too big, but they're warm. I'll step outside. Check on the horse." "In the blizzard." "The barn's attached. Won't go far." He pulled on a different coat, averting his eyes. "Take your time." When he left, Joanna struggled out of her wet things with numb fingers. The shirt was indeed too big, the trousers needing to be rolled up several times, but they were dry and warm and smelled faintly of cedar from storage. The wool socks felt like heaven on her frozen feet. She was hanging her wet clothes near the stove when Thorn returned, snow dusting his shoulders. He stopped in the doorway, something flickering across his face. "Jake was taller than you," he said unnecessarily. "They're perfect. Thank you." He busied himself with the coffee pot, clearly unsettled by seeing her in his brother's clothes. When he finally handed her a cup, his hands weren't quite steady. "The storm?" she asked. "Getting worse. We're here for the night at least, maybe longer." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't proper." Joanna almost laughed. After everything Samuel's fists, working in a saloon, fighting to survive, he was worried about propriety. You saved my life, Thorn. I think that trumps what the gossips might say. He started to correct her use of his first name, then seemed to think better of it. Soup'll be ready soon. Nothing fancy, just what I've got. They sat at his handmade table, eating bean soup and hard biscuits while the storm raged outside. The windows were white with driven snow, the wind howling like a living thing. Does it storm like this often? Joanna asked. Few times each winter. This one's early, though. Usually don't see blizzards until December. He studied her over his coffee cup. You need better clothes for winter. That coat you've been wearing won't cut it out here. I know. She looked down at her soup. I'm saving for one. Murphy's got some on credit. No. The word came out sharper than intended. No credit. I pay my own way. He nodded slowly. Understood. But if you freeze to death walking home, you won't be paying anybody anything. Despite everything, she smiled. Practical. Have to be, out here. But he was almost smiling too, the lines around his eyes softening. The wind gusted particularly hard, rattling the windows. Joanna shivered despite the warmth of the stove. You can have the bed, Thorn said. I'll bunk out here. I can't take your bed. You can and you will. His tone brooked no argument. You're still half frozen, and the bedroom's warmer. Smaller space. Holds heat better. She wanted to argue, but couldn't. Exhaustion was pulling at her, the warmth and food making her eyelids heavy after the terror of the storm. Thorn led her to the bedroom, small, sparse, but clean. The bed was covered with a quilt that looked handmade, probably by some long-dead mother or wife. He added another blanket from a trunk, lit the small stove in the corner. He cleared his throat. Chamber pot under the bed. I'll knock before coming in to tend the stove. The intimacy of the arrangement hit them both. They'd be spending the night under the same roof, only a thin door between them. In town, this would ruin her completely. Thorn! She caught his sleeve as he turned to go. Thank you, not just for tonight, for everything, the protection at the saloon, checking on me. Why do you... I told you, everyone deserves a chance to start clean. But there was something more in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. Is that all? He looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable in the lamplight. That first night, when I saw you in the red lantern, you looked... He stopped, started again. You looked like you were drowning, but too proud to call for help. I recognized the look. From where? From my mirror. He gently removed her hand from his sleeve. Get some rest. Storm might last days. When he left, closing the door softly behind him, Joanna sat on the bed, his bed, and tried to process the evening. This morning, she'd been a saloon girl counting her tips. Tonight, she was wearing dead boy's clothes, sheltering from a blizzard with a man who killed that boy, and somehow feeling safer than she had in years. She lay down, pulling the blankets up to her chin. They smelled like him leather and wood smoke and something indefinably male. Through the door, she could hear him moving around, banking the stove, settling in for a cold night on the floor. Sleep comes easier with whiskey. Samuel used to say, but he was wrong. Sleep came easier when you were warm and safe, when the storm outside couldn't touch you, when someone stood guard between you and the world. She thought about calling out, inviting him to share the bed purely for warmth. Of course. The thought shocked her even as it formed. What kind of woman had she become to think such things? But she knew the answer. She'd become a survivor, someone who took comfort where it was offered, who recognized kindness when she saw it, who was learning that not all men were Samuel. The wind howled on, but Joanna slept, dreaming of gray eyes and gentle hands, of coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe and silence deep enough to heal in. When she woke hours later to add wood to the small stove, she found the main room empty. Thorn was in the barn, she realized, giving her privacy even at the cost of his own comfort. She added wood to both stoves, then paused at the bedroom door. "Thorn," she called softly. Footsteps. Then his voice. "Everything all right? Come inside. You'll freeze in that barn." A long pause. "I'm fine. Please." She didn't know why it mattered, only that it did. "The floor in here is no worse than a barn, and it's warm." The door opened slowly. He stood there with a blanket over his shoulders, snow in his hair. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He spread his blanket near the stove, as far from the bedroom door as possible. The gesture touched her, still protecting her reputation even now. "Good night, Thorn." "Good night, Joanna." The storm raged on, but inside the station, two broken souls found rest. The blizzard lasted 3 days. 3 days of white silence broken only by wind and the crackle of the stove. 3 days of careful distance and unexpected closeness, of two people learning to exist in the same space without fear. On the first morning, Joanna woke to find coffee already made and Thorn cooking breakfast flapjacks with the last of his maple syrup. They ate in companionable quiet, the storm making conversation seem unnecessary. "I need to learn this," she said, watching him flip a flapjack with practiced ease. "Not much to it, just flour, water, bit of salt, baking powder if you have it." "I meant surviving out here, winter clothing, reading weather signs, all of it." She met his eyes. "I won't be caught helpless again." Something like approval flickered across his face. "I can teach you, if you want." They spent the morning going through his stores, Thorn explaining what was needed for a plains winter. Extra blankets, lamp oil, food that wouldn't spoil, ways to insulate windows and doors. Joanna took mental notes, calculating costs against her saved tips. "The most important thing," he said, showing her his small arsenal, "is being able to protect yourself, not just from weather." "I don't know how to shoot." "I can teach that too." He handed her an unloaded revolver, showing her how to hold it. "Though hopefully you'll never need to." Her hands shook slightly, not from fear of the weapon, but from memories of Samuel waving his gun when drunk, threatening her, the cat, the furniture, anything that moved. "Hey." Thorn's voice was gentle. He covered her hands with his, steadying them. "This is different. This is about keeping yourself safe." "I know." She forced herself to focus, to see the gun as a tool rather than a threat. "Show me." They spent an hour on gun safety, how to load, aim, clean. Thorn was a patient teacher, never raising his voice, never making her feel foolish for her questions. When the wind died down briefly, he even took her to the barn to practice aiming at a target chalked on the wall. "You're a natural," he said after she managed to hit near the center 3 times in a row. "I have a good teacher." The compliment hung between them, heavier than intended. Thorn cleared his throat and took the gun back. "Storm's picking up again. We should get inside." The second day, Joanna insisted on doing something useful. She mended his shirts while he worked on repairing tack, both of them sitting near the stove. The domestic scene should have felt strange, but instead it felt right, natural, like something she'd been missing without knowing it. "You do fine work," Thorn observed, watching her tiny, even stitches. "My mother taught me before she died." Joanna tied off a thread. "She always said a woman should have skills beyond keeping house. You never know when you'll need to earn your own way. She used to say, 'Smart woman.'" She would have hated Samuel." The name slipped out before she could stop it. "Would have seen through his charm to what lay beneath." "But you were young." 17 and stupid. He was handsome, said pretty words. My father had just died, and I was scared of being alone." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out being alone would have been better." Thorn set down the bridle he was mending. "How bad was it?" She considered lying, giving the sanitized version she'd prepared for anyone who asked. But something about the storm's isolation, about the man across from her who carried his own guilt, made truth seem necessary. "Bad," Not at first. He waited until after the wedding to show his true nature. Started with words, moved to fists. By the end, she touched her ribs unconsciously. The doctor said I was lucky the brakes healed straight. Thorne's hands clenched on the leather. If he wasn't already dead. But he is. She kept her voice steady. Drank himself to death while I was at my sewing circle. Came home to find him on the kitchen floor, the empty bottle still in his hand. Good riddance. The vehemence in his voice made her look up. His face was hard, angry in a way that had nothing to do with her. Jake used to hit girls, he said quietly. When he was younger, I caught him once, backhanding the Murphy girl because she wouldn't walk out with him. I thrashed him good. Thought I'd beaten it out of him. But looking back, there were signs. The way he treated his horse. The pleasure he took in others' pain. Maybe he was always meant to go bad. You couldn't have known. Couldn't I? He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I was supposed to protect him, raise him right. Instead, I let him become someone who would have been another Samuel, given time. Joanna rose, moved to stand beside him. Outside, the world was white and formless. You did what you could. Sometimes people choose their own darkness despite our best efforts to show them light. He looked down at her, something raw in his expression. Is that what you tell yourself about not being able to save Samuel? No. She met his gaze steadily. I tell myself, I'm glad he's dead. That makes me terrible, probably damned, but at least I'm honest about it. You're not terrible. His hand rose as if to touch her face, then dropped. You're a survivor. They stood there, inches apart, the storm cocooning them from the world. Joanna felt the pull between them, as inexorable as gravity. It would be so easy to lean into him, to seek comfort in his strength. Instead, she stepped back. I should start dinner. That night, as they sat by the stove, Thorne asked, What will you do after winter? I mean, will you stay in Dust Hollow? I don't know. I'm saving money. But for what? She stared into the fire. Sometimes I think about going further west, California, maybe somewhere nobody knows me at all. Running doesn't change who you are. Speaking from experience. He smiled ruefully. 2 years of hiding on this ridge, and Jake's ghost followed me anyway. The dead travel light. Then what do you suggest? Stop running. Build something where you are. Make a life that's yours, not just an escape from the old one. Easy for you to say. You have this place, your reputation as someone not to cross. I'm a saloon girl living in a boarding house, one step away from... She couldn't finish. From what becoming what they already think you are. His voice was fierce. You're better than that, stronger. You could do anything, run the mercantile, start a restaurant, hell, become the town seamstress. You have choices. With what money everything I save goes to survival. Then let someone help. No. The refusal was automatic. I won't be beholden. Not again. Never again. He subsided, but she could see he wasn't finished with the argument. The third day dawned clear. The storm finally blown out. Joanna stood at the window watching sunrise paint the snow-covered world in shades of rose and gold. Beautiful, she breathed. Yes, but when she turned, Thorne was looking at her. Not the view. Heat flooded her cheeks. The snow will make travel difficult. I have a sledge. I can take you back whenever you're ready. He paused. Or you could stay until it melts more. The offer hung between them, loaded with possibilities. Stay. Here, where she felt safe. Here, where someone looked at her like she was worth saving. I have to go back, she said softly. I have work tonight. Of course. They prepared to leave in careful silence. Joanna changing back into her own clothes, dried and mended. Packing Jake's things to wash and return. The little station felt like a haven she was reluctant to leave. The trip back was slow. the horse pulling the sledge through deep drifts. Thorn had wrapped her in so many blankets she could barely move, but she was warm. They didn't speak much, both aware that something had shifted between them during those storm-bound days. As they neared town, Joanna could see people beginning to dig out. Smoke rose from chimneys, and a few brave souls were already attempting to clear the main street. "There'll be talk," Thorn said quietly.
I know.
"I'm sorry for that. For your reputation." "My reputation was already in question. This won't change much." She managed a smile. "Besides, it's better than freezing to death for the sake of propriety." He pulled up at Mrs. Hutchinson's, helped her down. Several curtains twitched as neighbors observed their arrival. "Joanna." He caught her arm as she turned to go. "What I said about choices, I meant it. You don't have to stay at the Red Lantern. You don't have to do anything that makes you feel less than you are." She looked up at him, this complicated man who'd shown her more kindness in a few days than she'd known in years of marriage. "And what am I?" "Thorn. More than you know. More than this town deserves." He released her arm, stepped back. "Take care of yourself. You too." She watched him drive away, then faced Mrs. Hutchinson's door. Time to return to real life, to face the whispers and speculation. But something had changed in those 3 days, not just between her and Thorn, but within herself. She'd survived the storm. More than that, she'd found moments of peace within it. If she could do that, maybe she could survive anything. Mrs. Hutchinson opened the door before she could knock, eyes bright with curiosity. "Land's sakes, child. We thought you were frozen in a drift somewhere. That McCade fellow bring you back?" "He did. I sheltered at his place during the storm." The older woman's eyes widened.
All 3 days.
"All 3 days." Joanna kept her voice level.
He was a perfect gentleman.
"Well, I should hope so, though people will talk."
Let them.
Joanna moved past her, suddenly exhausted.
I'm alive, aren't I? That's what matters.
In her room, she unwrapped the whiskey bottle one more time. Samuel's last bottle, empty as his promises. She'd carried it all this way as reminder and warning, but maybe it was time to let it go, like the storm that had finally blown itself out. Tomorrow she'd return to the Red Lantern. Tomorrow she'd face the whispers and knowing looks. But tonight, she'd remember gentle hands teaching her to shoot, patient voice explaining survival, and 3 days when she hadn't been afraid. Sleep comes easier with whiskey, Samuel had said. But he was wrong. Sleep came easier when you knew someone would stand between you and the storm. The whispers started before Joanna even reached the Red Lantern that evening. Women pulled their skirts aside as she passed. Men exchanged knowing looks. 3 days alone with Thorn McCade in Dust Hollow's moral arithmetic. She might as well have announced her profession with a scarlet letter. Tom looked up when she entered, relief flickering across his face. "Thank God. We thought you'd frozen." "Nearly did, mister. McCade found me in the storm." "So we heard." His tone was carefully neutral. "You all right to work tonight?" Why wouldn't I be? But she knew why. The other girls, the ones who worked upstairs, were giving her measuring looks. Even Big Jim seemed uncertain how to treat her. Had she crossed that invisible line, become what they all assumed she'd eventually become? The night was brutal. Every cowboy seemed to think the storm had changed her status, made her available in ways she hadn't been before. Hands lingered too long when she served drinks. Comments grew bolder. "Heard you spent some time with McCade." One ranch hand slurred. "He pay well." Joanna kept her expression blank. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you don't." He grabbed her wrist.
How about I match his price?
She jerked away, spilling whiskey across his shirt. The man cursed, rising from his chair. But Big Jim was already there. "Problem. Bitch spilled on me." "You're drunk. Get out." After he left, Big Jim studied her.
You sure you're all right?
"I'm fine. But she wasn't. The armor she'd built working here, the careful distance she maintained the storm, had washed it away, leaving her vulnerable. Near midnight, a familiar figure entered. Not Thorne, she would have sensed him immediately. Instead, it was Mrs. Hutchinson's nephew, Edgar, who worked at the bank, a respectable man who shouldn't be in the Red Lantern at all. He approached her corner of the bar. "Aunt Martha sent me. Is something wrong?" "She wanted me to tell you." He looked uncomfortable. "She needs the room. Found a long-term boarder who can pay more. She's sorry, but you'll need to be out by week's end." The words hit like physical blows. "I see. It's nothing personal." Edgar hurried to add, though they both knew it was. "She runs a respectable establishment, and I'm no longer respectable." Joanna kept her voice steady. "I understand." After Edgar fled, she stood frozen, tray in hand. Where would she go? The other boarding house was full and the hotel too expensive. That left. "Heard the news," Tom said quietly. "Mrs. Hutchinson's a hypocrite. Takes your money quick enough when it suits her." "Do you have rooms here?" The question tasted like ashes. "Upstairs, those aren't for sleeping alone, girl." "I know." She met his eyes. "How much?" "Don't!" The sharp command surprised them both. "You're not that desperate. Not yet." "Aren't I?" She laughed bitterly. "No room, no references. Reputation in tatters. What would you suggest?" Tom poured himself a drink. Unusual for him while working. McCade helped create this problem. Maybe he should help solve it. "No." The refusal was immediate. "I won't go begging to him." Pride's a cold bedfellow, Joanna. But she wouldn't bend, not on this. She'd taken his shelter in the storm because the alternative was death. This was different. This was choosing dependence over dignity. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. When closing time came, Joanna counted her tips mechanically. Even those were less tonight, apparently. Suspected fallen women didn't merit the same generosity. She was wrapping her shawl when Tom approached again. "There might be another way. The widow Martinez, out past the cemetery. She's got a little cottage. Used to rent it before her arthritis got bad. Might take a boarder who'd help with chores." Hope flickered. "Would she rent to me?" "Maria Martinez doesn't give a damn what the town biddies think. Lost her husband and 2 sons in the war. Survived on her own since. She respects strength." He scribbled an address. "Tell her I sent you." Joanna walked home through empty streets, the snow muffling her footsteps. In her room, she sat on the narrow bed and finally let herself feel the weight of it all. The storm had changed everything, broken open the careful life she'd built. Now she had to build again, from even less. She unwrapped the whiskey bottle, staring at it in the lamplight. For the first time since leaving Kansas, she understood its appeal. How easy it would be to uncork oblivion, to stop fighting for just one night. Instead, she wrapped it again and began to pack. 2 mornings later, Joanna stood before a small adobe cottage on the Mexican side of town. The widow Martinez answered her knock, a small woman, bent with age but with fierce dark eyes that missed nothing. "Tom sent you," she said in accented English. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am, I need a room, and I can work. Cooking, cleaning, whatever you need. I heard about you, the widow who works at the saloon, who spent 3 days with the hermit during the storm." Maria studied her. "You don't defend yourself. Would it matter people believe what they want to believe?" A smile creased the old woman's face. "True. Come in." The cottage was small but warm, filled with bright woven blankets and the smell of chili and corn. Maria led her to a lean-to room off the kitchen. "It's not much, but it's private. Has its own door. $15 a month. But I'll take 10 if you help with heavy work. My hands." She held up gnarled fingers. "They don't do what they used to." "I accept." Relief made Joanna's knees weak.
When can I move in?
Today, tomorrow, whenever you like. I don't sleep much. Company will be good. Maria's eyes sharpened. That McCade, he's a good man.
Yes, he saved my life in the storm.
And nothing more. Heat flooded Joanna's cheeks. Nothing more. Maria didn't look convinced.
Men don't usually save women for nothing, but maybe this one is different.
That evening at the Red Lantern, the atmosphere was different. Word had spread about her eviction and her new arrangements. Some saw it as confirmation of her fall moving to the Mexican Quarter, away from respectable society. Others seemed impressed that Maria Martinez had taken her in.
"That's one tough old bird," a regular commented. "Lost everything in the war but never bent. Her husband died at Glorieta Pass, both boys at Valverde. She buried them and kept going."
Joanna thought about that as she served drinks. Another widow who'd survived loss and judgment. Maybe that's why Maria had opened her door recognition of a kindred spirit. Near closing time, Thorne appeared. Joanna's heart jumped before she could stop it. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. He took his usual spot at the bar, but his eyes followed her as she worked. When she finally approached with the whiskey bottle, he covered the glass with his hand.
"I heard about Mrs. Hutchinson."
News travels fast.
"I'm sorry, it's my fault."
"No," she cut him off.
"It's small minds and smaller hearts, not your fault. Let me help. I have money."
"No." Gentler this time.
"I've found a place. The widow Martinez."
His eyebrows rose.
"Maria, she doesn't take boarders." "She's making an exception."
"Because she recognizes a fighter when she sees one." He smiled slightly. "Good. You'll be safe there. She's tougher than most men in this town." They stood there, the bar between them like a wall. So much unsaid. So much that couldn't be said in this place with its watching eyes and wagging tongues. "I should get back to work," Joanna said finally. "Wait." He pulled something from his pocket, a small wrapped package. "I was in Murphy's earlier. Thought, well..." She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a folding knife, the handle carved from horn, small enough to conceal in a pocket or boot.
"It's beautiful."
"It's practical. A woman alone should have protection she can carry." He cleared his throat. "There's something else. About your reputation. These rumors..."
"Don't."
She closed her hand around the knife. "We both know nothing improper happened during the storm. That's all that matters."
"Is it?"
His voice dropped.
"Joanna, what if the rumors were true, not about the storm, but about us?"
The words hung between them like a challenge. Around them. The saloon continued its raucous business, but they might have been alone for all Joanna noticed. "What are you saying?"
"I'm saying I haven't slept well since you left. I'm saying I keep looking for excuses to come to town. I'm saying..."
He stopped, ran a hand through his hair.
"I'm saying maybe the gossips see something we've been too careful to admit."
"Thorne." Her voice was barely a whisper.
"I can't. Not now. Maybe not ever. I just got free of one man. I'm not Samuel."
The words were fierce.
"I would never..."
"I know." She touched his hand briefly.
"That's what scares me. You're not Samuel.
And that makes you dangerous in a different way." He turned his hand, catching her fingers.
"I can wait. I'm good at waiting." "And if I'm never ready?"
"Then I'll be the best friend you've got in this town. No expectations, no demands. Just there. If you need me." Tom's voice cut through the moment.
"Last call, folks."
Thorne released her hand. "I should go. But Joanna, that knife, keep it close. There are other Wade types in this town. Men who think a woman alone is fair game. Be careful." After he left, Joanna finished her shift in a daze. Had that conversation really happened? Had Thorne McCade, killer of his own brother? Hermit of Sanctuary Ridge, just declared his intentions. Walking to Maria's cottage through the cold night, she fingered the knife in her pocket. Such a practical gift, yet somehow more intimate than flowers or poetry. He knew what she needed: protection, independence, the ability to defend herself. Maria was still awake, sitting by her small fireplace with knitting that her gnarled hands could barely manage. "You're late," the old woman observed. "Busy night." Joanna hesitated. "May I ask you something? Your husband, did you love him?" Maria's hands stilled. "Roberto. Yes, I loved him. He was a good man, gentle with the horses, gentle with me. Why? How did you know that he was worth trusting?" "Ah." Maria set down her knitting. "The hermit." Joanna flushed. "How did you—" "I'm old, not blind. He watches you, that one, like a hawk watches the sky, always aware." She studied Joanna with those sharp eyes. "You're afraid. Wouldn't you be after what I survived with Samuel?" "Yes, but fear and caution are different things. One keeps you safe, the other keeps you alone." Maria struggled to her feet. "I'll make tea. You look like you need it." As they sat with their tea, Maria spoke of Roberto, of love found and lost, of the strength required to continue alone. "But you had good memories," Joanna said. "I have only bad ones." "Then maybe it's time to make new ones. Not saying with him that's your choice, but don't let Samuel steal your future along with your past." Later, lying in her small room, Joanna thought about the evening, about Thorne's words, Maria's wisdom, the weight of the knife in her hand. She thought about trust and fear and the courage required to know the difference. Through her window, she could see stars brilliant in the cold sky, somewhere out there. Thorne was probably looking at the same stars, probably wrestling with his own ghosts. "I can wait," he'd said. Maybe, Joanna thought. She was tired of making him wait alone. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight she needed to learn to sleep without fear in this new place, to prove she could stand alone before she even considered standing with someone else. The knife lay under her pillow, within easy reach. Tomorrow she'd ask Maria to teach her some of those fighting tricks Tom had mentioned. Tomorrow she'd continue building this new life, one careful brick at a time. But tonight, for the first time since the storm, she whispered into the darkness, "I heard you in my dreams too, Thorne, every night since." If the wind carried her words across the miles to Sanctuary Ridge, only the stars knew. Winter settled over Dust Hollow like a gray blanket, bringing short days and long, cold nights. Joanna had found her rhythm at Maria's cottage up before dawn to stoke the fires, help with breakfast, then off to town for supplies before her evening shift at the Red Lantern. The work was hard but honest, and Maria's quiet company was a balm after years of walking on eggshells around Samuel's moods. She'd been there 3 weeks when the stranger arrived. It was a Tuesday evening, slow at the saloon, when a well-dressed man pushed through the doors. He wasn't a cowboy or a merchant. His clothes spoke of Eastern money, his hands soft and unmarked by labor. He surveyed the room with sharp eyes before approaching the bar. "Whiskey," he told Tom. "Your best." While Tom poured, the stranger's gaze found Joanna. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Satisfaction. She couldn't tell, but it made her skin crawl. "You must be Mrs. Bellamy," he said when she came to clear nearby tables. She froze. Nobody here used her married name. "Do I know you?" "Charles Morrison." He extended a hand she didn't take. "I'm Samuel's cousin, from Chicago." The tray trembled in her hands. Samuel never mentioned Chicago family. "No, I don't suppose he would have. We lost touch after some unfortunate business dealings." Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I was sorry to hear of his passing." "Thank you." She turned to go, but his next words stopped her. "I've come about his estate. Actually, there are some irregularities." There was no estate, Samuel died with nothing but debts. So you say, but there's the matter of the missing funds from our joint venture. $20,000, to be exact. The number was absurd. Samuel had never seen that kind of money in his life. You're mistaken, Mr. Morrison. Am I? He pulled out a leather portfolio. I have documents here, contracts, promissory notes, all with Samuel's signature. Then they're forgeries. Samuel was a drunk, not a thief. Morrison's smile widened. How unfortunate, because if the money can't be recovered from his estate, the debt passes to his widow. That would be you. The blood drained from Joanna's face. She'd left Kansas with nothing, built this fragile new life from scratch. Now this man wanted to tear it all down with paper and lies. I need to see these documents, she managed. Of course. I'm staying at the hotel. Perhaps you could call tomorrow. We can discuss this like civilized people. He finished his whiskey and stood. I do hope we can resolve this amicably. Mrs. Bellamy, I'd hate to involve the law. After he left, Joanna's hands shook so badly she had to set down her tray. Tom appeared at her elbow. You all right? No. She quickly explained about Morrison and his claims. Tom cursed colorfully. Sounds like a confidence game. Show up in a frontier town, claim debts from dead men whose widows can't defend themselves. But what if he has real documents? What if Samuel really did? Then you need help. Legal help. Tom glanced around the saloon. Or the other kind. I can't afford a lawyer. Wasn't thinking of a lawyer. She knew who he meant. But running to Thorne felt too much like the old patterns finding a man to solve her problems. Trading one protector for another. I'll handle it, she said firmly. But that night, walking home through empty streets, she fingered the knife in her pocket and wondered if she was being brave or foolish. Maria was still awake when she arrived. The old woman took one look at her face and poured 2 glasses of her homemade mezcal. Drink, then talk. Joanna explained about Morrison, the claimed debt, the threat of legal action. Maria listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with each word. This Morrison, he travels alone. I think so. Stays at the hotel, not the boarding house. Yes. Rich men traveling alone, staying in expensive places. Maria spat into the fire. In my experience, such men are usually running from something themselves. But what can I do if he goes to the sheriff? Sheriff Daniels is lazy and likes his comfort. He won't move against a local woman on the word of a stranger without proof. Maria refilled their glasses. You need to see these documents, see if they're real. He invited me to the hotel tomorrow. Don't go alone. Maria's voice was sharp. That's how women disappear, going alone to meet men in hotel rooms. Joanna knew she was right, but who could she ask to accompany her? Her reputation was already tattered. Being seen entering a man's hotel room would destroy what little remained. The next morning, she made a decision. Pride be damned, she needed help. And there was only one person in Dust Hollow she trusted. She borrowed Maria's old mare and rode out to Sanctuary Ridge. The winter sun was weak, offering little warmth as she navigated the familiar trail. How different from that desperate flight through the blizzard. Now she came by choice, seeking aid she didn't know how to ask for. Thorne was splitting wood when she arrived, his movements economical and powerful. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, and his face transformed surprise, pleasure, worry chasing each other across his features. Joanna, is everything all right? No. She dismounted, glad when he took the reins. I need help. Come inside. Over coffee, when had his coffee become a comfort, she explained about Morrison. Thorne listened without interrupting, though his knuckles went white around his cup when she mentioned the hotel meeting. He's lying, Thorne said flatly when she finished. How can you be sure? Because I knew Samuel Bellamy's type, small-time mean, not big-time clever. He'd have drunk $20,000, not hidden it. But Morrison has documents. Then we need to see them. Thorne stood. What time is this meeting? 2:00. But Thorn, I can't ask you. You're not asking, I'm offering. He pulled on his coat. We'll go together, publicly. Let the whole town see if they want. Better your reputation suffer than you disappear into some back room with a stranger. Disappear. You don't think. I think a man claiming $20,000 from a widow might do anything to get it, or to get her to sign something giving him claim to money that doesn't exist. His jaw tightened. You're not going alone. They rode back to town together. Joanna acutely aware of curtains twitching as they passed. Let them talk, she thought fiercely. Better a scarlet woman than a dead one. The hotel lobby was nearly empty when they arrived. The clerk's eyes widened at seeing them together, but Thorn's cold stare kept him silent. They climbed to the second floor, found Morrison's room. He answered their knock with apparent pleasure. Mrs. Bellamy and a friend. Thorn McCade. Thorn didn't offer his hand. I'm here as Mrs. Bellamy's advisor. I see. Morrison's smile turned calculating. Well, do come in, though I'm not sure this concerns you, Mr. McCade. Anything concerning Mrs. Bellamy concerns me. The words hung in the air like a declaration. Morrison's eyes sharpened, reassessing the situation. The room was well appointed. Morrison's luggage expensive leather. He gestured to chairs, but Thorn remained standing, positioning himself between Morrison and the door. Joanna sat, trying to project calm she didn't feel. The documents, she said simply. Morrison produced his portfolio with a flourish. As I mentioned, Samuel and I were partners in a venture importing goods from Mexico to sell in Chicago. Very profitable. Until Samuel disappeared with the profits. He spread papers on the small table. Joanna leaned forward, Thorn reading over her shoulder. The documents looked official enough: contracts, receipts, ledgers showing deposits and withdrawals, all with Samuel's signature. But something was wrong. These dates, she said slowly. They're from last spring. Yes. Samuel broke his right hand in March. Couldn't hold a pen properly until June. She pointed to a signature dated April. This isn't his writing. Morrison's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps you're mistaken about the dates. She's not. Thorn's voice was quiet, but dangerous. And I think you know it. What's your game? Morrison? Or is that even your real name? How dare you? I dare because I've seen your type before. Rolling into frontier towns, targeting widows and orphans with fake claims and forged papers. Thorn picked up one of the documents. Good forgeries, I'll give you that. But not good enough. Morrison stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. I'll take this matter to the sheriff. Do that. Thorn smiled coldly. I'm sure Sheriff Daniels will be interested in these forgeries. Even more interested when he telegraphs Chicago and finds out Charles Morrison died of cholera 2 years ago. The color drained from Morrison's face. You can't prove. Can't I? Thorn pulled out his own paper. Telegraph from the Chicago police. Seems they're very interested in finding a confidence man matching your description. Something about a widow in St. Louis who signed over her house before disappearing. Morrison lunged for the door, but Thorn was faster. They grappled briefly before Thorn pinned him against the wall. Here's what's going to happen, Thorn said conversationally. You're going to pack your bags and be on the evening stage. If you're not, I'll personally deliver you to Sheriff Daniels along with this telegraph. Clear. Morrison nodded frantically. Thorn released him, and he scrambled to gather his papers. The documents, Joanna said quietly. I want them. Morrison handed them over with shaking hands. It wasn't personal. It never is with your type. Thorn opened the door. Evening stage. Don't miss it. They left Morrison packing frantically. In the hotel lobby. Joanna's knees suddenly gave out. Thorn caught her elbow, guided her to a chair. You knew, she breathed. You already checked on him. The moment Tom told me last night. He knelt beside her chair. I sent telegraphs to Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City. The answers came this morning. Tom told you. He was worried. So was I. His hand covered hers. I'm sorry if I overstepped. You saved me. Again. She turned her hand, linking their fingers. I came to you for help. I just didn't expect you to have already solved it. I told you I'd be there if you needed me. That means being ahead of the trouble when I can. They stayed there, hands linked, oblivious to the desk clerk's fascinated stare. Finally, Joanna stood. I should get these to the sheriff. File a complaint in case Morrison tries this elsewhere. I'll come with you. Thorne. She squeezed his hand. You've done enough, more than enough. I can handle the sheriff. He looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. The offer stands, though, always. Outside, the winter sun seemed brighter. Joanna clutched the forged documents, evidence of another escape, another survival. But this time, she hadn't faced it alone. Thank you, she said simply. No thanks needed between us. He touched his hat. Take care, Joanna. She watched him head for the livery stable, then turned toward the sheriff's office. The town gossips would have a field day with this Thorne McCade playing hero for the widow again. But she found she didn't care. Morrison was a ghost from her past, trying to chain her to Samuel's memory. Thorne was what her future? She wasn't ready to name it yet, but he was something, someone, a man who solved her problems before she even asked, who stood between her and danger without demanding payment in word or deed. That night at the Red Lantern, word had already spread. The mysterious stranger, the confrontation at the hotel, Thorne's involvement. The story grew with each telling until Morrison became a desperate gang leader and Thorne had fought off 6 men to protect her. Hero of the day, Tom said with a grin. Again. He just helped with a legal matter. Sure, legal matter that required pinning a man to a wall, way I heard it. Joanna focused on her work, but her mind kept drifting to that moment in the hotel lobby. Fingers linked with Thorne's, feeling safe and protected but not diminished. Maria was asleep when she got home, but had left a note. Heard the news, that one's a keeper. Lying in bed. Joanna thought about keepers and keeping, about trust slowly built and carefully earned, about a man who watched over her from a distance but came close when needed. Tomorrow, Morrison would be gone. Another ghost banished. Tomorrow she'd return to her routine, building this new life day by day. But tonight, she allowed herself to imagine a different tomorrow, one where she didn't have to face the ghosts alone, one where strong hands and gray eyes promised safety without chains. I can wait. Thorne had said, maybe, she thought as sleep claimed her. He wouldn't have to wait as long as they'd both assumed. Spring came to Dust Hollow like a cautious visitor, testing the air with warm breezes before committing to staying. The snow melted into mud, revealing the town's winter secrets, broken bottles, lost boots, and the occasional unfortunate creature that hadn't survived the cold. Joanna had survived. More than survived, she'd begun to thrive. Her work at Maria's cottage had expanded beyond simple chores. The old woman was teaching her herbal remedies, how to set broken bones, birth babies when the doctor was too drunk or too far away. Skills that mattered, that made her valuable beyond her ability to serve whiskey. She still worked at the Red Lantern 3 nights a week, but it felt different now. She wasn't trapped there, desperate for each dollar. It was a choice. Extra money she was saving for. Something, she wasn't sure what yet, but having choices was a luxury she'd never known. The spring festival was Tom's idea. Town needs something cheerful after that hard winter, he'd announced. Dancing, food. Remind folks there's more to life than survival. The abandoned church was volunteered as a venue. It hadn't held services in 2 years, not since the preacher ran off with the blacksmith's wife. but the building was sound and large enough for dancing. Joanna spent the day helping Maria prepare food for sale: tamales, empanadas, sweet cakes dusted with cinnamon. The work was hot and satisfying, and Maria's running commentary on the townspeople kept her laughing. That one. Maria pointed to a woman buying ribbons at Murphy's booth. She tells everyone her husband died in the war. Ha, he's living in Denver with a dance hall girl half his age. Maria, Joanna tried to look scandalized, but couldn't stop smiling. What is truth? This town is full of liars and hypocrites. At least you and your hermit are honest about what you are. He's not my hermit. No, then why does he ride in every Tuesday? Regular as clockwork. Why does he happen to be wherever you are? Joanna focused on shaping dough. It was true Thorne had been coming to town more often. Always with some excuse: supplies, business with the sheriff, checking on a horse, but somehow he always ended up wherever she was, a protective shadow she'd grown to rely on. We're friends, she said finally. Friends. Maria snorted. That's what I called Roberto before he kissed me behind my father's barn. As evening fell, the church filled with people. Lanterns cast warm light, and someone had strung ribbons from the rafters. A makeshift band fiddle, guitar, and harmonica set up in the corner. It was simple, even shabby, but after the long winter it felt like magic. Joanna had changed into her best dress, the blue one she'd altered for work but made respectable again. She helped Maria sell food, watching the dancing with a wistfulness she didn't want to acknowledge. She'd loved dancing once, before Samuel, before bruises hidden under long sleeves, before she'd learned to move silently to avoid attention. That girl seemed like a stranger now, someone who'd believed in happy endings and gentle hands. You should dance, Maria said, following her gaze. I'm working. Food's almost gone. I can manage. The old woman's eyes were too knowing. When did you last dance, Mija? My wedding. The admission hurt. 10 years ago, full of hope and dreams, not knowing the nightmare she was dancing into. Then it's time for new memories. Before Joanna could respond, a shadow fell across their table. She looked up to find Thorne, dressed in his best, which meant clean clothes and a fresh shave. He looked uncomfortable but determined. Mrs. Martinez. He nodded to Maria, then turned to Joanna. Would you dance with me? The question hung in the air. Around them, people were already whispering. Thorne McCade at a social event was rare enough. Asking the widow Bellamy to dance, that was unprecedented. Joanna's throat closed. I don't remember how. Neither do I. His smile was rueful. We can figure it out together. Maria gave her a little push. Go, I'll clean up. Joanna let Thorne lead her to the dance floor, acutely aware of every eye in the place. The band was playing a slow waltz, simple enough for out-of-practice feet. Thorne's hand at her waist was light, careful. He held her like she might break or bolt. Too much, he asked quietly. No. And, surprisingly, it wasn't. His touch didn't make her want to run. Just strange, being this close to someone and not being afraid. We can stop any time. I don't want to stop. They moved carefully at first, finding their rhythm. Thorne was a better dancer than he'd claimed, leading her through the steps with gentle confidence. Gradually, Joanna relaxed, letting the music carry her. Where did you learn to dance? She asked. My mother. She insisted both Jake and I learn, said it would help us catch wives someday. His smile was sad. She died before seeing how that turned out. I'm sorry? A long time ago. He adjusted his hold slightly, drawing her closer. What about you? My father, he loved to dance, would waltz my mother around the kitchen while dinner burned. The memory was sweet and painful. They died when I was 15. That's when I went to live with my aunt, met Samuel. Young to lose so much. We all lose things. The trick is not letting it define us. Is that what we're doing? Not letting it define us? She looked up at him. In the lantern light, his eyes were more silver than gray.
I hope so.
The song ended, but neither moved. The next tune started livelier, a reel that had couples laughing and spinning. Thorn looked uncertain. We don't have to.
Yes,
Joanna interrupted.
we do.
This dance was harder, required more contact, more trust, hands catching and releasing, bodies moving in sync. Joanna found herself laughing as Thorn spun her skirts flaring out. For a moment, she felt like that girl again, young, hopeful, believing in possibilities. Then she caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Wade, the drunk who'd pulled a knife on her months ago. He was watching them with an ugly expression, his hand moving to his hip where a gun would be. Thorn must have felt her tense. He followed her gaze, his own body shifting subtly, putting himself between her and Wade. It's fine, he murmured.
He's not armed.
Tom and Big Jim made sure of that at the door. How do you know? Because I've been watching him all night, him and 2 others who might cause trouble. At her look of surprise, he smiled grimly. You think I'd bring you into a crowd without making sure it was safe? The protectiveness should have bothered her, should have reminded her of Samuel's possessiveness, his need to control. But this was different. Thorn wasn't trying to cage her. He was trying to clear a path. They finished the dance without incident, though Joanna was aware of Wade's stare. When the music ended, she was breathless and warm, feeling more alive than she had in years. Thank you, she said. For what? For reminding me that not all memories have to be bad ones. His face softened. Before he could respond, Tom appeared at their elbow. Hate to interrupt, but there's a situation. He jerked his head toward where Wade was now arguing with Big Jim. Might need your help, McCade. Thorn's jaw tightened. Get Joanna somewhere safe.
I don't need,
she started, but Tom was already steering her toward Maria's table. Just for a minute, he said quietly. Wade's been drinking rot-gut whiskey outside, working up his courage, no sense being a target. From Maria's corner, they watched Thorn approach Wade. The crowd parted, giving them space. Joanna couldn't hear the words, but she saw Wade's face go pale, saw him back toward the door. Whatever Thorn said, it worked. Wade left, shoulders slumped in defeat. That man, Maria commented. He knows how to handle trouble without making more trouble. A rare skill. The festival continued, but some of the joy had leaked out for Joanna, the reminder that even in moments of happiness, the past could intrude, that men like Wade would always see her as less than, as something to be used or scorned. Thorn returned, his face carefully neutral. He won't bother you again. What did you say to him? The truth, that you're under my protection, that anyone who touches you answers to me. He paused. I hope that was all right. I know you value your independence. It's all right. She touched his arm. Sometimes protection and independence can exist together. Dance with me again. This time the song was slow, sweet. Other couples joined them, and for once Joanna didn't feel the weight of watching eyes. She was just another woman dancing with a man who cared for her, finding rhythm and grace in the simple act of moving together. I need to tell you something, Thorn said quietly, about Samuel's death. She stiffened. What about it? I had Tom's cousin in Kansas look into it, quietly, just to make sure there wouldn't be more surprises like Morrison. He pulled her slightly closer. The doctor's report was clear. Heart failure brought on by alcohol poisoning. No suspicion of anything else. Why are you telling me this? Because I see the guilt you carry, the relief you felt when he died, and the shame of feeling that relief. His voice was gentle. You didn't kill him. Joanna, his own choices did. You're allowed to be grateful you survived him. The words hit her like a physical blow. Tears burned her eyes, and she buried her face against his shoulder. Around them, Couples continued dancing, the world moving on while she stood still in the circle of Thorn's arms.
I wished him dead,
she whispered.
so many times.
Wishing isn't killing, and even if it was, you had cause. His hand rubbed gentle circles on her back. Let it go, Joanna. Let him go. He's taken enough from you. They stood there, swaying slightly with the music, while Joanna felt something hard and cold inside her begin to thaw. The guilt she'd carried, the certainty that she was damned for her relief. Thorn's absolution might not matter to God, but it mattered to her. When she finally pulled back, his shirt was damp with her tears.
I'm sorry.
Don't, he cupped her face gently. Don't apologize for healing. The band announced their last song. Couples formed for a final dance, but Joanna shook her head. I should help Maria pack up. I'll help too. They worked in companionable silence, loading Maria's baskets and counting the evening's earnings. The old woman watched them with knowing eyes, but said nothing. As the church emptied, Thorn walked them home. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead. At Maria's gate, the old woman excused herself with obvious intent, leaving them alone. Thank you for tonight, Joanna said, for the dancing, for Wade, for everything. You don't have to thank me for treating you the way you deserve to be treated.
Don't I after Samuel? I forgot what that looked like.
Then let me remind you. He stepped closer. Every day, if you'll let me. The air between them crackled with possibility. Joanna knew he wanted to kiss her, knew she wanted it too, but wanting and being ready were different things. As if reading her mind, Thorn stepped back. Good night, Joanna. Sleep well.
Wait.
She caught his hand.
I'm trying, Thorn, to let go, to move forward. It's just...
I know, and I told you I can wait. He squeezed her fingers gently. You're worth waiting for. He walked away, leaving her at the gate with a heart full of conflicting emotions. Hope and fear, desire and caution, all tangled together like ribbons in the wind. Inside, Maria was pretending to be asleep. Joanna smiled at the obvious ruse and went to her room. She unwrapped the whiskey bottle, still her talisman, still her reminder. But tonight, for the first time, she considered throwing it away, letting go of that last piece of Samuel, that last chain to the past. Not yet, but soon. Outside her window, she could see Thorn's silhouette in the distance, walking the empty streets back to the livery stable where his horse waited. Her protector, her friend, her maybe something more. Sleep comes easier with whiskey, Samuel had said, but tonight, sleep would come easier with the memory of strong arms and gentle hands, of dancing and laughter and the promise of patience. Tonight, she would dream not of the past but of possibilities. The summer heat had baked Dust Hollow into submission. Even the usual troublemakers seemed too tired to cause problems, preferring to nurse their drinks in whatever shade they could find. Joanna wiped sweat from her brow as she helped Maria tend the small garden behind the cottage. The herbs and vegetables struggled in the dry soil, but with careful watering, they survived. The chamomile is ready, Maria observed, her gnarled fingers testing the flowers. Good for sleep, for worry. You should take some to your hermit. He's not my... Joanna stopped. After months of denial, the protest had worn thin. Why would Thorn need chamomile? Men like him, they don't sleep well. Too many ghosts. Maria straightened slowly. Besides, it's Tuesday. He'll be in town. Tuesday. Somehow, it had become their day. Unspoken, but understood. Thorn would arrive mid-morning for supplies, and somehow end up wherever Joanna was. They'd share lunch at the small cafe, or he'd help with deliveries if she was working for Murphy. Small moments, carefully casual, building something neither quite dared name. I need to stop at the Mercantile anyway. Joanna said, I suppose I could bring him some tea. Maria's smile was knowing. Take the honey too, Men pretend they don't like sweet things, but they do. An hour later, Joanna walked toward Murphy's with a basket of herbs and honey. The familiar figure outside made her heart skip Thorne, loading supplies onto his wagon. He looked up as she approached, and his face softened in that way it only did for her. "Joanna." "Thorne, Maria sent some things." She held up the basket. "Chamomile for sleeping, and honey." "That's kind of her." He took the basket, their fingers brushing. "And of you to bring it." They stood there in the morning sun, neither moving. Around them, Dust Hollow went about its business, but they might have been alone for all the attention they paid. "I was thinking," Thorne said carefully. "The old swimming hole out by Willow Creek. Water's still high from spring melt. Might be cool there. Are you inviting me swimming, Mr. McCade?" Color touched his cheeks. "Not swimming, just sitting by the water, talking, if you'd like." She should say no. The propriety of it. What people would say. But the heat was oppressive, and the thought of cool water and Thorne's quiet company. "I need to finish some mending for Mrs. Patterson, but after—" "I'll wait." He always did. They left town separately to avoid the worst gossip, meeting at the creek as the afternoon sun slanted through the willows. The swimming hole was as promised clear water pooling between smooth rocks, shaded and peaceful. Joanna sat on a boulder, removing her boots and stockings without shame. Months of friendship had worn away such modest concerns. She dipped her feet in the water and sighed with pleasure. "Better?" Thorne asked, settling beside her. "Much." She watched minnows dart around her toes. "I used to do this as a girl. My mother would scold me for coming home with muddy hems." "Jake and I practically lived at a place like this in summer." His voice held the usual mix of pain and fondness when speaking of his brother. He could hold his breath longer than anyone. They sat in comfortable silence, feet in the water, shoulders almost touching. Joanna had learned to appreciate these quiet moments, so different from the chaos of her marriage. With Samuel, silence meant brewing storm. With Thorne, it meant peace. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Always." "What did you tell Wade at the festival? He's avoided me completely since then." Thorne picked up a smooth stone, turned it over in his hands. "I told him about the last man who wouldn't leave a woman alone after I warned him, how he ended up in territorial prison for assault, how I made sure there were witnesses to his crime, evidence that couldn't be disputed." "Did you really?" "Yes, 3 years ago, over in Cedar Ridge, man named Garrett who thought farm widows were easy prey." His jaw tightened. "He was wrong. You protect people, women especially. My mother raised me right. She always said a man who'd raise his hand to a woman was no man at all." He skipped the stone across the water. "Took me a long time to forgive myself for not seeing what Jake was becoming in time to stop it." Joanna touched his arm. "You can't save everyone. Thorne." "No, but I can try to save the ones in front of me." He covered her hand with his. "Speaking of which, Tom tells me you've been asking about buying the old bakery building." Heat flooded her cheeks. He shouldn't have said anything. It's just a dream. "Tell me about it." And somehow, she did. Words spilling out about her vision: a small restaurant. Nothing fancy. Good, simple food. A place for travelers and townspeople alike. She could use Maria's recipes, her mother's, create something that was hers alone. "The building's been empty 2 years, she finished. "Mr. Olson wants $300 for it. I've saved nearly half, but you're scared." "Terrified," she admitted. "What if I fail? What if no one comes? What if you succeed?" He turned to face her fully. "What if you build something wonderful? What if you finally stop running from Samuel's shadow and plant roots? Is that what I've been doing, running? Aren't you keeping that whiskey bottle like a reminder to keep moving? Never letting yourself dream too big in case you have to leave again?" His words hit too close to truth.
I can't afford to fail. Thorn, I don't have family to fall back on. No safety net except what I build myself. You have me. The simple declaration hung between them. Joanna's heart raced. I know we're careful with each other, he continued, dancing around what this is, but I need you to know you have me. For friendship, for protection, for whatever you need, no conditions. Thorn, I'm not asking for anything, not trying to rush you, just let me help. Loan, investment, whatever makes you comfortable. The bakery building could be yours by week's end. She pulled her hand away. I can't. Don't you see taking money from you? Being indebted, it's too much like Samuel. His voice was gentle. Joanna, I'm not him. I'd never use debt to control you. I know that, rationally. I know. But the fear. She wrapped her arms around herself. Sometimes I wake up terrified that this is all a dream, that I'll open my eyes and be back in that kitchen, watching him drink, waiting for the violence to start. Come here. She let him pull her against his side, her head on his shoulder. He smelled of leather and sun and safety. The fear may never completely go away, he said quietly. Jake's been dead 2 years, and I still wake sometimes expecting to hear he's robbed another stage. But the fear gets smaller, quieter, especially when you're not facing it alone. I've been alone so long, I don't know how to be otherwise. Learn with me. The words rumbled through his chest. We're both broken in our own ways. Maybe together we make something whole. She lifted her head to look at him. This close. She could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the small scar on his jaw. You're not broken. Thorn. Aren't I living alone on that ridge? Coming to town once a week like some kind of ghost I was dead inside until you walked into the red lantern. His hand cupped her face. You brought me back to life. Joanna, let me return the favor. The kiss was inevitable. Soft, careful. A question more than a demand. Joanna froze for a moment, memory threatening to crash over her. But this wasn't Samuel's whiskey-soaked possession. This was Thorn patient, gentle, waiting for her to decide. She decided yes. Her hand slid into his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened. Years of loneliness and longing poured into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I'm sorry. Thorn started, but she pressed fingers to his lips. Don't apologize. Not for that. She managed a shaky smile. Though we probably shouldn't. Not here. No, he agreed, though his thumb traced her cheekbone. You deserve better than a creek bank. You deserve courtship, flowers, all of it. I don't need all of it. I just need... She struggled for words. Time, patience, the chance to choose this, rather than fall into it. You have all of that, always. He pressed his forehead to hers. But Joanna, the bakery let me help, not as whatever we're becoming, as a business partner. Draw up papers, make it official. I believe in your dream. She thought about it as they sat by the water, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The old bakery with its good ovens and better location, the recipes she'd been collecting. The way people's faces lit up when they tasted her food. Equal partners, she said finally. Everything in writing. And I pay you back from profits? Agreed. They sealed it with a handshake, formal and proper. Then Thorn kissed her again, and propriety flew away on the summer breeze. The ride back was quiet, both processing what had changed. At the edge of town, they separated again, old habits of discretion. But Joanna felt the invisible thread between them, stronger now for being acknowledged. Maria was waiting on the porch, her knowing look saying she'd heard everything on the gossip wind. So, was all she said. So I'm buying the bakery building, and... Joanna touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of Thorn's kiss. And things are changing. About time. Maria patted the bench beside her. Sit, tell me about this bakery. They talked until the stars came out, planning menus and renovations. The dream that had seemed impossible that morning now felt within reach. That night, Joanna unwrapped the whiskey bottle for what she decided would be the last time. Tomorrow she'd throw it away, let go of that final reminder. Tonight, though, she held it up to the lamplight one more time. You were wrong, Samuel, she whispered, about everything. Sleep came easier than it had in years. Not from whiskey, not from exhaustion, but from hope. She dreamed of bread rising and coffee brewing, of a bell over a door that would chime when customers entered, of Thorne at a corner table, reading while she worked, of choosing joy instead of just surviving. When morning came, she wrapped the bottle in old newspaper and threw it in Maria's burn barrel. The glass cracked in the heat, the last of Samuel's hold on her turning to smoke and ash. Good riddance, Maria said, adding kitchen scraps to the fire. Yes, Joanna agreed, watching the smoke rise into the clear morning sky. Good riddance indeed. Thorne arrived an hour later with the papers Murphy had drawn up. Partnership agreement for the bakery, fair and legal. Joanna signed with a steady hand, no longer afraid of documents and contracts. Partners, Thorne said, folding his copy carefully. Partners, she agreed, in business, in slowly building trust, in whatever came next. They shook hands again, but their eyes promised more, patience and possibility, fear slowly giving way to faith. The old bakery waited, dusty and neglected, but Joanna saw what it could be, what they could build together, one careful brick at a time. Samuel had been wrong. Sleep didn't come easier with whiskey. It came easier with dreams worth chasing and someone worth chasing them with. The bakery opened on a crisp October morning. 6 months after that day by the creek, Joanna stood in the doorway, flour already dusting her apron, watching the sunrise paint dust hollow in shades of gold. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the ovens her mother's recipe, perfected over weeks of trial. You ready? Maria asked from behind the counter. The old woman had insisted on helping, despite her arthritic hands. People are already gathering. Through the clean windows, Thorne had spent hours scrubbing years of grime away. Joanna could see townspeople pretending to casually pass by. Curiosity and hunger would bring them in. She hoped the rest would be up to her food. The bell above the door chimed as Tom entered, Big Jim close behind. Smells like heaven in here, Tom declared, then ordered 3 loaves of bread and a dozen of Maria's empanadas. For the saloon, he said with a wink, but I might eat 1 or 2 on the way. Word spread quickly. By noon, Joanna had sold out of bread and was running low on everything else. Her hands moved automatically, kneading, shaping, serving while her heart soared. They came not just for curiosity, but returned for quality, even misses. Hutchinson appeared, stiff with propriety but unable to resist the cinnamon rolls. I suppose everyone deserves a second chance, she said, not quite meeting Joanna's eyes. Yes, Joanna agreed simply. They do. Thorne arrived as the lunch rush ended, slipping in quietly as was his way. He'd been there at dawn, helping set up, then disappeared to let her have her moment. Now he sat at the corner table that had become his, a book open but unread as he watched her work. Partner, she said, bringing him coffee and a slice of apple pie still warm from the oven. Partner. His smile was proud. Look what you built. We built. No. He caught her hand. I just helped with money and labor. This, he gestured at the bustling space, the satisfied customers. This is all you. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Sheriff Daniels stopped by, grumbling about his wife sending him for bread. Doc Morrison, no relation to the confidence man, ordered pies for the boarding house. Even some of the ranchers from outlying areas, drawn by reports of good food and fair prices. As the sun began to sink, Joanna finally had a moment to breathe.
She stood at the window, watching Dust Hollow go about its evening routines. 6 months ago, she'd been serving whiskey to rough men, flinching at harsh words, saving pennies with desperate hope. Now,
"You did it,"
Maria said softly.
"You planted roots." "I think I did."
Wonder colored her voice. I actually did. The dinner crowd was smaller but steady. Families mostly, looking for simple, good food. Joanna had added a few tables, turning the bakery into something more, not quite a restaurant, but heading that direction. Near closing time, a familiar, unwelcome face appeared. Wade, sober for once, standing awkwardly at the threshold. "I ain't here for trouble," he said quickly, seeing Thorne rise from his corner. "Just wanted to apologize for everything." Joanna studied him, seeing the genuine discomfort in his face. "Apology accepted, Mr. Wade." Relief flickered across his features. Could I buy some bread? My mother's coming to visit, and she always complained about my cooking." "Of course." She wrapped 2 loaves, added a few cookies. "On the house, for your mother." Wade's eyes widened. That's kind of you, more than I deserve." "Everyone deserves kindness, Mr. Wade, and bread." After he left, Thorne moved behind the counter, helping her clean up. They worked in synchronized rhythm, comfortable in shared space. "That was generous," he observed. "Maria says holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting others to die." She smiled. "Besides, his money spends like anyone else's. If he becomes a regular customer, always practical." But his tone was admiring. "One of many things I love about you." The word hung between them, love. They'd danced around it for months, shown it in actions, but never spoken it aloud. Joanna turned to face him fully. "Thorne." "I know, too soon, too much," but he didn't take it back. She surprised them both by stepping into his arms. "No, not too much. Maybe not even soon enough." "Joanna," hope and uncertainty warred in his voice. "I've been thinking about fear and courage, about choosing life instead of just surviving." She looked up at him. "About how sleep comes easier when you're not alone." His arms tightened around her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Maria's arthritis is getting worse. She needs the cottage's small room more than I do. I'm saying your station has all that empty space. I'm saying—" She took a breath. "I'm saying I love you too, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." "Joanna." Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She smiled, feeling wild and free and absolutely certain. "Ask me, Thorne. Ask me properly." He laughed, the sound rich with joy, then dropped to one knee right there in the flour-dusted bakery. "Joanna Bellamy, will you marry me? Will you share my ghosts and let me share yours? Will you build a life with me at Sanctuary Ridge?" "Yes." No hesitation, no fear, just yes. He stood and kissed her, deep and sure and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "When?" he asked. "Soon, before winter sets in." She touched his face. "I want to wake up in that station, make coffee in that kitchen, watch snow fall through those windows. With you." "The town will talk." "Let them. They'll be too busy eating my bread to gossip much." They closed the bakery together, hanging the sign that said "Back tomorrow" with new meaning. Tomorrow and all the days after. Building something sweet and solid and theirs. The wedding was small, held in the bakery itself 2 weeks later. Tom stood as Thorne's witness, Maria as Joanna's. Doc Morrison officiated, having mail-ordered the proper credentials. The place was packed with townspeople, drawn by curiosity and the promise of free cake. Joanna wore her blue dress, the one she danced in at the spring festival. Thorne managed a proper suit, looking uncomfortable but determined. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to stand between you and any storm. he said, sliding a simple gold band on her finger. To be your refuge, but never your cage. To love you without seeking to change you. I promise to choose you every morning, Joanna replied, her own voice clear. To build a life with you based on trust, not fear. To let the past be past and face the future together. About time, someone called out, maybe Tom, maybe Big Jim. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Doc Morrison pronounced them married, and Thorne kissed his bride with enthusiasm that had the townspeople cheering, even Mrs. Hutchinson dabbed at her eyes, propriety forgotten in the moment. The reception was simple food Joanna and Maria had prepared, music from the same band that played the spring festival. As the sun set, painting the bakery in warm light, Joanna danced with her husband and felt complete for the first time in her life. No ghosts tonight, Thorne murmured in her ear. No, she agreed. They're all laid to rest. Later, much later, they drove to Sanctuary Ridge under a canopy of stars. The station looked different somehow, no longer a hermit's hideaway, but a home waiting to be filled with life. Thorne carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the formality. Inside, he'd prepared flowers on the table, fire in the stove, the bed made with new quilts Maria had sewn. Welcome home, Mrs. McCade. Home? She tested the word. Found it perfect. Yes. They stood by the window, looking out at the night landscape. In the distance, Dust Hollow's lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Tomorrow Joanna would return to open the bakery. Thorne would help with the morning rush. They'd build their days around shared work and quiet evenings, healing and hoping in equal measure. That first night, Thorne said quietly, when I saw you in the red lantern, you looked so lost but so fierce. I thought, there's someone who understands survival. And when you stepped between me and that drunk, Joanna replied, I thought, there's someone who understands protection without possession. We've come far from that night. Yes, she turned in his arms. Farther than I ever dreamed possible. They didn't need whiskey to find sleep that night. They had each other, warm and real and present. No ghosts, no fears. Just two people who'd found their way through darkness to dawn. Joanna's last thought before sleep claimed her was of Samuel's favorite saying. He'd been wrong. As he'd been wrong about so many things. Sleep didn't come easier with whiskey. It came easier when you were home, when you were loved, when you'd finally stopped running and started living. And in the morning, she'd make coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe and watch the sun rise over their ridge. She'd kiss her husband goodbye and ride to town to feed Dust Hollow, then come home to the man who'd waited so patiently for her to be ready. Sleep came easy now. Life came easier too. The bottle was long gone, but the lesson remained sometimes the best way to heal from the past was to build a better future. And that's exactly what Joanna McCade intended to do. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Joanna and Thorne's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts on this tale of healing, hope, and second chances. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these frontier tales of love and redemption. Until next time, partners.